Hello, today for review I've got Audiosense AQ7 hybrid flagship model by company I really respect. I like that Audiosense usually set some goals and achieve them with tuning, and AQ7 isn't an exception because it's not the model not tuned towards the mass market traditional tuning of this price segment. We'll talk about the sound a bit later, but kind of spoiler, they are good, but it's not for everyone. But actually same applies to almost every single their model. And T800 that became a huge bestseller, AQ3 their more natural hybrids, DT200 that I reviewed recently. So basically every single model they created, they are some way unusual. And here used 6 nose balanced armatures and a dynamic driver. And if I understand the description right, here they used unusual idea because for low frequencies they used both balanced armatures and dynamic drivers, so really unusual idea. Price is $500, and of course it's the pretty big price, especially comparing with their previous models. But from another hand, I think it's really competitive price that can be compared with and other models in terms of sound. And actually let's have a closer look. Package is nice, it shares same ideas with their previous models, so kind of internal chart on the package, good soft touch finish, and not much polygraphy on the box. It opens as usual, remove the outer box, and inner one opens this way. Inside you will get manual, short, and additional page with specs. So 110 decibels and 13 ohms of impedance, 5 Hz, 22 kHz, so nice specs, but actually it's traditional nowadays. As usual, inside there is a plastic case for storage, protecting everything. Also like this idea by Audiosense. Let's pull them out. Earpieces themselves. Put that aside for a while, and traditionally accessory set, and now they put a lot of them. So cleaning tool, stock cable, it's high purity copper 6N by specs, and different set of tips, lots of them. So it's something reminds Sony hybrid tips with soft and sticky silicone. Let's proceed with opening these packages. Just traditional gray silicones. Foams, each tips 3 pair, and also gray silicones with green stems we've seen few times before. So at least in terms of accessory set, they're not trying to save every single penny. But let's take a closer look at the earpieces themselves. And as usual for the Audiosense, they are 3D printed from the medical resin. Now they used a bit different faceplates. They made step aside from their traditional carbon faceplates. Now it's some kind of scratchy texture, but looks pretty appealing, at least to my taste. So company's name and logo, and also you can see that, as usual, internal structure is nice and well organized. So here is the dynamic driver with separate sound tube, some balanced armatures here, here and there, different tubes, so everything inside is organized really nicely. Some kind of pressure relief hole, not sure what its purpose, but anyway, they also took care about some acoustic treatment. Some wires are visible inside and PCB probably with some crossover parts, so we can see them. So definitely the model that is interesting to look inside and to explore. Done really nicely and accurately. Shape of course is pretty ergonomic. They are bigger than for example DT200, but still fitting nicely, at least to my ears. They have a really good long spout, so sound isolation is slightly above average. It will be enough for noisy street or for public transport, but of course in subway or on the plane probably you will need something with deeper insertion and higher isolation. Cable is replaceable. Of course here used MMCX connectors. Nice click, so it promises us good durability, and cable is pretty nice. It's soft, it has good ergonomics, maybe not super soft, but on the softer side, so low level of microphonics, not getting hard when it's cold outside like some cables do. There is an ear hook, no memory wire, but still holding the cable around ears pretty well, and metal splitter with chin slider, and after the splitter it goes braided down to the angle jack. So pretty nice design, good accessory set, good ergonomics, and of course as usual really good level of internals and organization and internals design. And of course about the sound, I gave them about 60 hours of burn-in. Small changes were during first few hours, not more than that, so probably they don't require some extended burn-in. But they definitely need tips rolling and a few experiments to get the better fit, to get the most isolation, and of course tips also changing sound in a noticeable way. I selected this probably it's something like Sony hybrids, this soft and sticky silicone. And actually I used medium size because bigger ones were not fitting properly. Usually I'm using the biggest tips, but not this time. But medium ones provided really good isolation. Also let's have a player to show examples. We'll use Aston Kern SP2000, and so, in terms of signature, Audiosense decided to make it really unusual. It's a V-shape, but it's not a traditional V-shape because they put accents in different places. You know, sometimes I think that Audiosense suffer from their uniqueness most of all. It would be so simple for them to create a model with natural linear sound signature and get a praise from let's name that group audiophiles who prefer natural and monitoring representation. It could be easy for them to create a traditional V-shaped signature and get mass market appreciation and tons of positive reviews. But they decided to continue following their own unique tuning, so some people like that, others dislike. It's always hard to go against the mainstream. I said that in a previous review of their model, I will repeat it once again. So, it's a V-shape, but unusual accent starts from low frequencies because they made the most noticeable accent on the sub-bass. And probably that's why they need this dynamic driver, because their T800, you know, comparisons with T800 is unavoidable. Their T800 has main accent on the mid bass. They have deeper layers of bass, but mid bass was more prominent and bit more forward. And here they've decided to accent the deepest layers of bass, so deepest bass here is present. It's nice, it's punchy, it's well controlled, and it stays in place. And they have a bit less mid bass comparing with deep bass now, and sometimes it sounds like not liking bass. It's hard for me to formalize it. If record has less deepest bass, they sounding more linear and closer to monitoring representation. They are not monitoring per se, because even mid bass is still accented, but they closer to monitoring representation. But on records with deepest layers of bass, they starting to show that more basic character. So it's unusual sound, a little bit, but it's really pleasant. And my assumption that they did that on purpose, so bass leaves more space for mid frequencies, so they made bass a bit less forward, because they definitely could make mid bass and upper bass more forward, but it will overwhelm the mids. But at the same time, please don't think that they lacking mid bass, because it's still accent at low frequencies. It's just not the big accent. So it's normal accent on mid bass and bigger accent on the deepest bass. Bit unusual tuning, but it's definitely fun, because from one hand it has deep bass for electronic music and genres that relies on that deepest rumble. And at the same time, they are technical and represent real instruments that acoustic double bass, for example, and lowest notes of fortepiano, they're not going into the deepest layers of bass. And mid bass accent here is just normal to show these instruments as they should be. And as an example, I got David Bowie, Blackstar. And it's a really good demonstration of this unusual tuning, because it starts with that signature intro, but like after 20 seconds appears deepest rumbling sounds, and both parts are playing really nice. And also I need to highlight the coherence of this model, because it's really hard to spot the drivers overlap. So Audiosense made a lot of work tuning this model. Mids are recessed from one hand, from another hand, thanks to the balanced armatures, they are still technical and they're not sounding too veiled, too soft or something like that. It's just balanced armature mids with a bit recessed lower mids and accent on the upper mids. So it's the most traditional part in tuning of this model. Maybe some people will lack weight on the lower mids, but for me it's still okay. It's more a matter of record, because when it's present in the track, when it's present in the mix, they are good. At the same time, they're not trying to highlight the macro dynamics, they're a bit more focused on the micro detalization, and they are a bit critical for the quality of record, of course. Not super critical, but still better records will be a big plus here, because they're not trying to hide something. Imaginary stage is definitely above average both in width and in depth, not the most huge, but noticeably higher. In some review I saw they mentioned that instruments sounding weird here and unnatural. I can't agree here, because they just natural and that's all. So it's more a matter of tracks and more a matter of representation. So if the record isn't perfect, maybe they will show that. But on the good audiophiliac record, they sounding really engaging with nice amount of details. And example for the mid frequencies is John Coltrane Locomotion, technical record that requires really technical performance. Blue note, of course, it's a sign of good, well-recorded track, and they sound this in-ear monitor sounding really nicely. Because of lacking any accents. Upper mids are a bit forward, of course, and it's adding a bit of spark to the saxophone, and also it's adding spark to female vocal and so on. And treble. So for treble, I read that initial tuning of the AQ7 was more fun, with more mid-bass and with more treble. But actually Audiosense decided not to release the model with tuning similar to T800, and they decided to reduce treble a little bit here to make it more polite. So it's still technical treble with slightly above average extension, but it's not as forward as T800, and it's not as forward as traditionally made by V-shape signature. So it means pretty good layering and nice overtone saturation, but treble here is not forward. It's not the model for super treble sensitive persons still, but it's definitely an option if you tested T800 and found it too bright for you. Still, resolution and attacks and decay resolution is good. Attacks and decays are a bit balanced armaturish, a bit lightweight with faster attacks and decays, but still really pleasant and technical. And as an example for the treble, it's probably one of the best records in the history of neo-progressive rock ever created, Steven Wilson. The pin drop, the pinnacle of Steven Wilson's albums, and I don't know, am I the only one who thinks that it's the best album, and more recent albums are great but not as good as this one? Or no, but still it's really great album. I definitely recommend it to everyone who likes progressive music, because the atmosphere here is great, and vocal is great, guitar work and percussions and all that stuff of course require treble, and this model delivers it without too overpowering. So to summarize it once again, it's a model that basically tuned to be technical with slight V-shapeness, but also had here a nice pleasant sub-bass that shows its character. So it's something in between the T800 and AQ3. It's definitely not the model tailored to suit everyone's taste, but I really hope that there will be people that will like it as much as I do. Speaking about the comparisons, basically in this price range I can't recall too much models, and I didn't test many of popular models in this price range, like, I don't know, some Fearless, for example, more expensive ones, or I don't know, Duno DK3001 Pro. They are more natural, with less deepest bass, with a bit more treble, so it's more natural and more monitoring. And SimGod's EM5, really underrated gem that didn't succeed on market, unfortunately. It's also more natural and more leaning towards the neutrality. Speaking about Audiosense own models, I already did that, but to highlight it once again, T800 is a bit more fun with more mid-bass and with more treble, so it's also cheaper, but it's definitely not as technical as this model. So this model is a step forward in terms of technical performance. It's tuned that way, and especially if you need a bit less treble, it could be a good option. And it's AQ3, pretty similar to this model in terms of technicality and so on, but this one has more weight and better treble definition. But of course, price of AQ3 is much lower, so price to quality ratio probably is better for it. I can't recall some other models in this price range, but definitely there were some, but Audiosense AQ7 stays unique. And you know, I really hope that this model will succeed, because we need Audiosense on market. We need the company who has their vision and who implements that in different models. It's hard nowadays to survive for such companies, but I really suppose that they will succeed in that. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.